This picturesque, isolated beach in Cape Wrath on the northwest tip of Scotland's mainland is known as Sandwood Bay and is long reputed to be haunted. There is one story in particular, quite well known to the area from the 1940s. It involves a crofter and his son from nearby Old Shaw Moor who went out collecting firewood one autumn evening. As the bay was a well-known ship's graveyard, due to the numerous vessels wrecked there before the Cape Wrath lighthouse was built in 1828, the sand was always abundant with wood. The beach, they said, was deserted for the duration of the time they were there. As night drew in, and they loaded up their pony and set off back to the grassy hills, their steed suddenly reared and staggered in fright. It was then that the father became aware of a bearded sailor standing nearby. He recalled the stranger's attire: sea boots, a sailor's cap, and a dark weather tunic with brass buttons. The stranger, who he swore had not been there a moment before, shouted to them that the wood they had taken was his property. With this, the duo promptly untied the wood, dropped it and fled. In 1949, what is thought to be the same figure was seen by members of a fishing party. The bearded man was seen walking along the crest of a sand dune before disappearing behind a small hill. Those who saw him believed that he must have been a poacher, so a young man from the party set out towards the dune to confront him. When he returned, white-faced and shaken, he said that he could find no one, and what's more, there was not a single footprint in the sand other than his own. There is another anecdote, told by three men from nearby Kinlochbevy, who had travelled 6 miles to Sandwood Bay in search of a lost sheep late one night, although no year is given. As they approached the bay, one man saw a large piece of driftwood nearing the moonlit shore. When he attempted to wade out into the water to fetch it, he says he was stopped in his tracks by the appearance of a black-whiskered man standing amongst the rocks a short distance from him. All three men saw him there, and they all agreed that there was something unnatural and unearthly about his appearance. Within a few seconds the stranger had vanished, as if merging into the rocks. In 1953 there was another sighting, this time by three friends from Edinburgh who were picnicking on the sand dunes to the southeast of the bay. They described the familiar figure of an old-time sailor as he watched them from a grassy knoll, before taking 2 steps back and fading to nothing. Just southeast of the bay is the ruin of Sandwood Cottage. In 1971, ghost hunter and author Peter Underwood described the structure as perhaps the most remote and solitary habitation in the whole of Scotland. During the 1960s, a fisherman by the name of Angus Morrison spent a night at the cottage. He reported that he had heard footsteps outside. When he looked towards the window, he said he saw the face of a bearded man peering into the cottage. But when Angus stepped outside to investigate, there was no one there. On another occasion, he says he was awakened in the cottage by the sensation that he was being suffocated by a thick black mass that seemed to be pressing down on him. In the early 1970s, 2 visitors from England camped within the walls of Sandwood Cottage. Going on the description of their ordeal, which was detailed in Peter Underwood's book A Gazetteer of Scottish Ghosts, Sandwood Cottage, now no more than a ruin, must have then been somewhat habitable. During the night, they were disturbed when, allegedly, the whole structure vibrated, and there were loud noises which sounded to them like doors being flung open and slammed shut, windows being smashed, and heavy horse-like galloping. It all seemed to originate, they said, from above their heads. No explanation was discovered, although I'd personally wonder what noises a storm would cause in such an isolated, exposed location. One theory often mentioned is that the bearded man was a living local man named James McCrory Smith, who was somewhat of a hermit. He lived out his later years in the area, hunted game in the hills, collected driftwood and fished at the beach. His house was 1.5 miles east of Sandwood Bay, an isolated cottage called Strathallic. As James McCrory Smith had only lived in the area since the 1960s, this might explain the so-called sightings by Angus Morrison and the English campers at Sandwood Cottage. But interestingly, before his death in 1999, when ill health forced him back into society, James McCrory Smith himself claimed to have experienced loud noises and an unseen presence at his own home, a presence which he was sure was neither animal nor human. Regarding the alleged apparition on the beach, It suggested that he was one of many shipwrecked men to lose his life off the shore of the treacherous Sandwood Bay. Just as England and some other regions around the world have famous tales of white ladies, Scotland claims its own fair share of female apparitions known as green jeans or green ladies. One such tale brings us to the historic county of Caithness in the far north-eastern reaches of the Highlands. The Castle of May, known for some time as Barrowgill Castle, stands midway between the villages of Dunnet and John O'Groats. It was once the Scottish home of the Queen Mother, and although for years she denied the existence of the apparitions said to haunt the upper floors of the building, it was revealed in a 2008 book entitled The Castle and Gardens of May, the Queen Mother's home in Caithness, that she was not only acutely aware of the phantom's presence, she had herself experienced the Green Lady on several occasions and referred to her as Poor Lady Fanny. The Queen Mother, along with many of the castle's visitors since Her Majesty's death in 2002, have reported feeling an unseen presence. There have been reports of disembodied footsteps, doors inexplicably opening and closing, and lights switching on and off for no apparent reason. Some of the castle staff are wary of going up to the top floor of the building, where Fanny Sinclair supposedly jumped to her death. The events surrounding the tragic love story between Lady Sinclair and Andrew Cruikshank resemble a legend dating back hundreds of years, although this particular story only unfolded during the late 19th century. That being said, as with centuries-old tales of forbidden love, this story is plagued with contradictory scenarios, and it's unclear as to what exactly took place. I'll begin with the most well-known and commonly told version. The 29-year-old Fanny Sinclair, who was the daughter of the 14th Earl of Caithness, James Sinclair, fell in love with a man thought to be well beneath her socially. His name was Andrew Cruikshank, and he was a ploughman and stable hand at the Castle of May. The love-struck couple began a secret relationship, but when Lady Sinclair's father found out about the love affair, and that they planned to marry, he banished his daughter to her bedroom in the uppermost room of Castle May's tower. There she spent most of her time, unable to meet with her intended groom. One of the windows in the tower was even bricked up, so she could not see him in the fields at work. Shortly thereafter he was discharged from his duties and exiled to England. The grief-stricken woman never saw him again, and, heartbroken, threw herself from the remaining open window of the tower. Barely alive, her crumpled body was carried to her bedroom, where she died on October the 11th, 1883. This is the legend. Another version of the story says that, in her heartbroken state, Lady Sinclair became increasingly unwell and died of tuberculosis, which was then known as consumption. When I looked into the official story and searched newspaper records from the time, the events stated are different again. According to newspapers like the John O'Groats Journal, the St James's Gazette, and the Aberdeen Evening Press, Fanny Sinclair became unwell a week before her death. The official story says that she lanced an abscess. The wound then became infected, and she died of uremia, which is a build-up of toxins in the blood, which often leads to kidney failure. There is no official mention of a relationship with Andrew Cruikshank or Lady Sinclair throwing herself from a tower, which may not be surprising, because if the story of forbidden love was true, it's likely that it would have been hidden from the public. But 132 years later the plot thickened again. In 2015, tour guide of the castle Katie Henderson said that she knows that the story is true, and that Andrew Cruikshank was none other than her great-great-uncle. Whatever the case may have been, Lady Sinclair, who was well known in Scotland for her charitable efforts towards poverty-stricken children, was laid to rest on October 17, 1883, in the churchyard of Canis Bay's Church of Scotland, 4 miles east of the Castle of May. Back in the 1950s, a mountaineering author and lecturer at the University of Glasgow by the name of Kenneth W. Richmond climbed the snowy Ben Eam mountain in the Southern Highlands on the lookout for ptarmigan, the small Scottish grouse. As he neared the top of the mountain, Richmond stopped to eat his sandwiches when, in the distance, strolling along the snow-covered landscape, he saw a man approaching. As the stranger drew closer, Richmond could see that he was in a black suit, better attired for an office building than the cold, inhospitable mountains of Scotland. When he stood a few feet away, Richmond noticed that he was an elderly gentleman. He looked unwell and bore a parchment-like complexion. Richmond called out to him and asked where he'd come from. Completely calm, apparently unaffected by the climate as he was not even out of breath, the gentleman replied that he had come from Arrochar, a village at the head of Loch Long. It was a journey that would have taken the best part of 3 hours to traverse, and hardly seemed possible given the man's attire, not to mention his apparently advanced age. Richmond asked if he'd seen any birds on his way up. The old man pointed in the direction from which he'd come, and said he'd seen some speckled water hens close to the foot of the mountain. With that, the suited stranger abruptly declared that he must be going. He had to catch the 6:10 train from Arrochar to Glasgow, but first he had to stop in nearby Glencroe. Richmond looked at his watch. It was 3:30. There's no way the man would have made the journey in the time he had left. As Richmond had left his car in Glencroe, he offered the man a lift to the station. But the stranger insisted on making his own way, saying that the walk would do him good. He bid Richmond farewell, turned away and began down the mountain. A perplexed Kenneth Richmond hesitantly continued his lunch, and then momentarily glanced downhill, but there was no one there. He panicked, got up, took several strides down the slope and looked around him. The wide expanse of snow-covered landscape was completely deserted, and there was no footprints to be seen. During his own descent, Richmond paused and noticed a group of ptarmigan precisely where the old man said he'd seen them. Concerned for the stranger's welfare, Richmond travelled to Arrochar station to learn that there was no 6:10 train to Glasgow. Wondering if the man had been lost or had an accident of some kind, he asked around for more information. He was assured by the station staff that no man matching that description had arrived that day, or any other day that they could recall. It was a strange business indeed, was Kenneth Richmond's conclusion, adding that he would never again climb Ben Eam. "19-year-old Paul Gander was a mechanic employed by the McRae and Dick Motoring Company, then situated on Strothers Lane in Inverness. It was late on Monday, December 10th, 1968, and Paul, having a heavy workload, worked late into the night in the dealer's body shop. 2 other employees had accompanied him that evening, but deciding to call it a night, they packed up and left Paul alone to his work. At around 10 p.m, Paul stopped working and began gathering up his tools. As he did, he caught the glimpse of a dark figure in the corner of his eye. He said he turned and was frozen to the spot when he saw, quite clearly, a man-like form shrouded in black glide along the garage floor before disappearing. The Aberdeen Press and Journal quoted Paul as saying, "After the corner of my eye I saw a movement, and then I saw this figure dressed in black standing behind me. It started gliding across the floor, and then, all of a sudden, it just disappeared. I decided to get out quick." This was not the first nor last strange occurrence at the McRae and Dick Company. In 1966, another employee came forward and told of a similar experience. This led to theories about the old horse stable that once stood on the site, and the restless spirits of long-dead stable hands and even phantom horses. Little more than 2 weeks after Paul Gander's experience, 32-year-old pump attendant John MacLeod was working the night shift on December 26th when he witnessed events he said he could not explain. It was a quiet night, John said, and the last customer had left some 20 minutes earlier. He was in the garage office listening to the radio when he was startled by a persistent car horn. Thinking it was coming from outside, John went to investigate, but traced the sound to his own car, a black MG Saloon, which was parked inside the building. As he approached, the horn stopped. When he returned to the office, the horn began again, and once again it stopped as John approached. This routine continued for the next hour. John was adamant that no one else was in the building, and no one could have entered without passing him first. He checked the mechanics of the horn but found no fault. Earlier, John MacLeod had laughed at the claims of Paul Gander and the other employees who had made claims of a haunting, but admitted that he could find no explanation for his own experience. He said, "I don't believe in ghosts, but there was definitely something weird going on." There is a grim, little-known legend attached to the graveyard of Fern Abbey in Tain, Ross County. Known as the Light of the North, the 800-year-old structure stands about 13 miles northeast of the town of Invergordon. It's said that many years ago, although frustratingly I couldn't find an exact year, a local farmer on the very evening of his wife's funeral went to the home of a buxom young lady who lived next to Fern Abbey and asked her to marry him. As it was well known in the village that the farmer was a wealthy man, the girl accepted his proposal, and by nightfall, wasting no time, the two had taken to the bedroom of the young lady's house. When the girl's mother unexpectedly returned home, she was shocked to find her daughter naked in bed with the man who had that day buried his wife. Outraged, she reminded the farmer that his wife was not yet cold in her grave. He laughed in response and said that she was already cold enough when she entered the ground. Despite his audacity and contemptuous tone, he quickly got dressed and left the house. As he made his way home, he looked across to the abbey's churchyard and his wife's freshly filled grave. There, through the evening's mist, he saw the shrouded figure of his wife stood next to her grave, staring at him. Completely overwhelmed with fear, he ran back to his house, where it's said that the relatively young man died of a stroke 2 weeks later.